Hello, hello. So I'm reading the comments, and Judy Ermlich has caught my attention. This should be a scandal like back with the meatpacking industry, like Upton St. Clair. Sad that the man died, but could it start a needed revolution in an industry gone wrong? That's really a prescient comment. And it's funny because earlier today I was on CNN with Casey Hunt, as I do on Friday mornings, usually at about 6:45 Eastern time, and we were talking about exactly that, Judy. How does a politician pay appropriate deference to the decedent, right? Brian Thompson leaves behind a wife and two kids. And you want to be sympathetic. I certainly do. I find it appalling to see now that there are wanted posters. Do you know this? This is in my newsletter today. There are wanted posters that are being placed in Midtown Manhattan identifying corporate CEOs who could be next. You don't want to reward the violence of allegedly Luigi Mangione. You don't want to be seen as rewarding that because that'll spur copycats. But by the same token, I think we all realize something needs to be done. I'm ahead of myself. Let me just back up for a moment and say that if you want to get out of the cold this weekend, how about Parks Casino in Shippensburg, which is Pennsylvania's newest casino? Every Friday is comedy night. Tonight, a free comedy show with the patriot of comedy, Paul Bond, masterfully mixing comedy and music. He's a very funny headliner. And then every Saturday night at Parks Casino in Shippensburg, they've got live music. Tomorrow night, No Can Do takes the stage. Plus, now you can bet sports on the Bet Parks kiosks in the side pocket. Catch all the football action every weekend starting at noon. Enjoy the side pocket stadium menu. Parks Casino Shippensburg. Convenient if you're in Hagerstown, Winchester, Chambersburg, Martinsburg, and so many others. Get lucky in no time at Pennsylvania's newest casino, less than an hour from Harrisburg, the state capital. What are you going to find inside besides the comedy and the good food? How about 500 state-of-the-art slot machines, 48 live dealer electronic table games, a great happy hour? Get in on all that action. Go to visit parkscasino.com. You got to be 21. Gambling problem, call 1-800-GAMBLER. So, on the healthcare and health insurance coverage theme, here's the poll question today at Smerconish.com. Is it the responsibility of our federal government to ensure that all Americans have healthcare coverage? From time to time, I will do this where I'll do a comparison between our audience, those who vote in the poll question, and some other poll that I have seen. And what drew me to make this the question today is that 62% of U.S. adults, according to Gallup, 62% of U.S. adults, the highest percentage in more than a decade, say it is the federal government's responsibility to ensure that all Americans have health care coverage. And this is a poll that was taken before the execution of United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson. So that number, 62%, who believe it's the federal government responsibility, had been as low as 42% in 2013 during the rollout of the Affordable Care Act. It has been as high as 69% in 2006. The same poll finds that fewer Americans than in the recent past rating U.S. health coverage and quality positively. Well, that's borne out in all the telephone calls that I've been taking and the social media reaction ever since this horrific event a week ago Wednesday. I would tell you something interesting. Make sure you're voting on that poll question today. I invited Professor G, Scott Galloway from the Stern School of Business, the host of hit podcasts, Pivot, the Prof G podcast, to be on my CNN program on Saturday, tomorrow. And I was drawn to want him to be on because the more that I'm reading about the alleged gunman, the man who's charged now with second-degree murder, the more I'm seeing some patterns here in terms of other conversations that I've had with Scott about the plight of our young men in this country. And Scott and I hashed this out yesterday, and without telling too many tales out of school, he said to me, look, we really don't know what we need to know about this guy. We don't know whether he really fits a profile or is typical of something larger going on in society. And instead, we had a conversation uh, talking about just the reaction to this and what it says about health insurance generally in our country. And Scott, is such a brilliant guy, rattled off for me all sort of factual information about the United States spending so much more comparatively than other nations, and yet getting so much less in terms of a return for our dollar. We're spending more than other nations, and yet we've got the lower life expectancy in comparison to all of them. And he almost sounded a little RFK Jr.-ish in a good way in talking about how the food lobby draws us in, and we have unhealthy lifestyles, and we eat a bunch of crap, the sort of stuff that's found in the center of the grocery store, not in the periphery of the grocery store. And then once we're in the clutches of the food lobby, now we need the health insurance lobby. So much health insurance lobby money gets spent on the Congress that it's as if we don't have a fighting chance, and we're not viewed as the customer, right? Because most of us get our health insurance from our employers. Consequently, we are forever David against Goliath with no ability to negotiate, totally at the whim of the health insurance companies. And the bargaining power that exists is in the hands of our employer, but our employer is really not there to protect us on an individual basis. Bottom line is the lobbyists get rich and we all get screwed. Now, how do you have this conversation? How do you have a conversation about making the health insurance environment coverage better without it being perceived as a reward for the barbarism that took place a week ago Wednesday in New York City? I mean, that's the issue. And that's the issue that I was talking about with Casey Hunt on CNN this morning. Is any politician going to emerge as sort of a champion of some of the legitimate concerns that I'm hearing from radio callers and are being expressed all over in the media in the aftermath of this? Will a politician be afraid to address these issues, or can they strike the right balance? I would like to think you can do two things at once. That you can say that it was god awful for someone to be killed in cold blood, and whomever did that and for whatever reason needs to be appropriately punished. But by the same token, have dialogue about the deficiencies of our health insurance system. One other thing that I should mention, just as all these thoughts are running through my head, and I'm dialed in on what we know today on this Friday about this recent episode. There is a report, and I have it in the newsletter today, that, well, two reports actually. There's one story that I have in the newsletter under the headline that the family didn't report him. When you actually read the story, what you see is that the NYPD said that they had, I think the number was 200 or so reports or tips, and that none of them identified this guy. Consequently, put two and two together, nobody in the family identified him. If you read that story, you're going to see a friend of his said it's not as easy as you might think to look at those images and to recognize him, because what you're not seeing is his very distinct curly hair, and that's what would have been the tip for many of us. But okay, there's one story that says that NYPD didn't know anything, and presumably then the family didn't say anything. There's another story, though, and this is the origin of the story is the San Francisco Chronicle. I didn't use the Chronicle today because they have a paywall, and anytime I can avoid a paywall, I try and do it for our newsletter subscribers. I've been meaning to tell you that. So I think we use the New York Post. But in any event, apparently the San Francisco Police Department notified the FBI of Mangione's identity. And you're wondering, how did the San Francisco cops know who he was? It's because the family had reported him as missing. So I read that story and I say, okay, this family clearly was going through a lot of pain and trying to find him. He was estranged. Who knows what the story is? I mean, he may have had some type of a break. He may have been off of his meds. I'm not defending. I'm just trying to understand. Of this much, I'm sure. Two families are shattered. Two families are completely shattered in this tragedy. Another story that we have today in the newsletter that just relates to all of this is that the Penn professor, that's his alma mater, the Penn professor who lionized him, now is apologizing. and taking ownership of her inappropriate comments. That's a good thing that she's taken ownership of it. Anyway, I want to know our audience reaction in comparison to the 62% from Gallup. So go to Smerconish.com and cast a ballot on this. Is it the responsibility of our federal government to ensure that all Americans have health care coverage? I'm mindful now of a 2008 debate between Obama and McCain, where the issue was one of, it was expressed as, is healthcare a right? Do you have a right to healthcare? And I think McCain struggled with that answer. I might be wrong, but that's what I'm getting at today. So go vote, and then I'll be able to look at our audience and compare it to the Gallup survey and see where we all come out. Okay. Appreciate all of you as usual. Thank you so much for listening.